I figured we would start with this headline that I saw this week. A Wisconsin ruling on Catholic Charities raises the bar for religious tax exemptions. And there's so much going on there that I don't know if the specifics of this case made it through to you, even if you saw a headline like that. So I wanted to discuss what this case was all about, what the Supreme Court's decision was in Wisconsin, and why this is actually a big deal. Because what they said is that a nonprofit organization doesn't get out of paying taxes or a certain type of tax just because they say, hey, we're religious, so we don't have to do it. Okay. And it was a 4-3 decision. It was close. But if you followed anything about Wisconsin politics, you know that last year they had a huge they had a huge campaign to see if a liberal justice could win that seat. She did. And that's the reason Wisconsin just got rid of its legislative gerrymanders. Huge decision. And this is another 4-3 case where the liberals outnumbered the conservatives on the court. So, like, elections matter. But let's get to the specifics about what this case was about. What it involved is something called the Wisconsin Unemployment Compensation Act. Okay, big words, big name, doesn't matter. But basically, employers across the state of Wisconsin are required to give money to the government. They got to pay taxes, specifically to help pay for citizens to get their temporary benefits when they're unemployed. You know, people who are out of work and file for unemployment benefits. Where does that money come from? It comes from these taxes that groups, organizations, companies have to pay. But in 1972, religious nonprofits were declared exempt from that law. They did not have to pay into the system. So if you're a church, you don't have to give money to unemployment taxes. And basically, what the law said is that nonprofits that are run by a church or ministry, religious organization, and that operate primarily for religious purposes, those 4 words you should remember, they don't have to pay into the system. So last year, there was an appellate court that said the Catholic Charities Bureau, along with 4 of its sub-entities that it oversees, were not eligible for that exemption. They were not religious organizations specifically. And like, no one doubts that they're run by the Catholic Diocese of Superior in Wisconsin, but there was disagreement over whether their work was inherently religious. For example, the groups that are overseen by Catholic Charities, the one we're talking about, they did work like helping people get placed into jobs. They helped people they helped feed the hungry. They helped people with developmental disabilities. And all of those are incredible things. I'm so glad those organizations are there to help with those causes. That's wonderful. But the question is, are those religious organizations? Because what the Catholic Charities Bureau was saying is that their desire to help the poor and disadvantaged was an extension of their faith. But helping the poor and disadvantaged is not inherently religious. You know what I mean? Just because you say, yeah, we're motivated to do that because of God. Well, that's nice, but no one cares what your motivation is. The work you're doing is not religious in any way. You're just trying to help people, and that's great. Like, all those services are technically secular in nature. Just because they're overseen by the Catholic Church doesn't mean they're working to advance Catholicism. And if they're not actively and directly promoting their faith, this is what the lower courts were saying. If they're not promoting their faith specifically, why should they get a tax exemption meant to benefit religious organizations? And the funny thing is, for decades, the Catholic Charities Bureau paid the unemployment tax. Why? Because they said their work was charitable, educational, and rehabilitative. It was not religious. Only in 2015 did they try to apply for the religious exemption, and they got rejected. And then over the next several years, you start seeing this back and forth because that decision gets reversed. Then it gets reversed again. Then they go to the courts, and one court says they're religious. The appellate court says they're not religious. So this is why this case made it up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And when they considered the case, they basically arrived at the same conclusion. All right. So check this out. I'm going to show you a bit from this decision, from the majority's decision here. The Court of Appeals concluded that for an employee's services to be exempt from unemployment tax, the organization must not only have a religious motivation, but the services provided, its activities, must also be primarily religious in nature. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. They're trying to figure out, can we look at these organizations, even if they're under an umbrella run by the Catholic Church, are these organizations specifically religious? And it didn't look like they were. Let me show you another thing here. Check out this excerpt from their decision. The record demonstrates that Catholic Charities Bureau and the sub-entities, the four groups that they were representing, which are organized as separate corporations apart from the church itself, neither attempt to imbue program participants with the Catholic faith. They're not shoving their faith on the people they're helping, nor supply any religious materials to program participants or employees. So they're not proselytizing, which, again, that's good. They shouldn't. Although not required, those would be strong indications that the activities are primarily religious in nature. But let's go on here. CCB's and the sub-entities' activities are primarily charitable and secular. The sub-entities provide services to individuals with developmental and mental health disabilities. These activities include job training, placement, coaching, as well as services related to activities of daily living. CCB provides background support and management services for these activities, a wholly secular endeavor. You get where this is going here. Such services can be provided by organizations of either religious or secular motivations, and the services provided would not differ in any sense. You get where this is going. Everything these organizations are doing, you could say, oh, an atheist group happened to do them, and they would look exactly the same, because there's nothing inherently Catholic about helping the poor. So the question is, are those organizations, can they just say, well, we're Catholic, so we don't have to pay the taxes? Well, the court's saying, I'm looking at everything you're doing. There's nothing Catholic about you. Helping the poor is not just a Catholic thing. And so this keeps going on for a while here until finally they said, we conclude, let me see if I could find this here. Maybe I can't. Maybe it's a little lower here. Here we go. This is the part I want to show you. Although CCB and the sub-entities assert a religious motivation behind their work, the statutory language indicates this is not enough to receive the exemption, right? An objective examination of the actual activities of Catholic Charities Bureau and the sub-entities reveals that their activities are secular in nature. We therefore conclude that CCB and the sub-entities are not operating primarily for religious purposes. And there you have it. So the Wisconsin Supreme Court said these organizations are doing secular work. They have to pay into the unemployment tax. That is an incredible conclusion that they came to. They're not just saying, we don't care that you're Catholic. I'm sorry, they're not saying, oh, you're Catholic, so I guess we'll give you whatever you want. You may remember the U.S. Supreme Court, when Hobby Lobby, the company, said we don't want to give our employees access to contraception under Obamacare, the U.S. Supreme Court's like, yeah, but your owners are Christian, so I guess it's a Christian company. They can do whatever they want in the name of Jesus. Like, that was a horrible decision years ago. But the Wisconsin Supreme Court here is saying, we don't care if the Catholic Church is literally your boss. The work you're doing is not Catholic, so you don't get to pretend to be Catholic in order to get out of paying taxes. So from here on out, it looks like charities will have to do a lot more than like point to a nearby cross to say they deserve a faith-based tax exemption. I mean, part of why this is such a big deal is because it almost feels courageous for any powerful court to state the obvious and to not give religious groups whatever the hell they want. But just because an organization cites a religious link doesn't make it religious. I mean, one article asked Patrick Elliott, who is an attorney for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, what would have happened if they ruled the other way? And the thing he said is that if the judges had said, sure, these organizations are religious because they're overseen by a religious entity, the next step, I'm quoting from Patrick here, the next step would be arguments to exempt religious hospitals and colleges like Marquette University from paying the unemployment tax, because those are also providing a secular service. You know what I mean? So this is a win for everybody. It's a win for employees who work for those organizations because now they get coverage too under Wisconsin's unemployment system. I want to show you one other thing here, which is that the three conservatives on Wisconsin's Supreme Court, they are so mad about all of this. They've been mad for over a year now, ever since the liberals took the majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But they did issue a dissenting opinion on this case. And let me show you the top of this. Here's the beginning. This is from Justice Rebecca Grassel Bradley. What's the first thing she writes in her dissent? It's a Bible verse from the King James Bible. Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Here's what's really funny about her citing a Bible verse to open up her dissent. Let's just scroll down, shall we? One paragraph. Impermissibly entangling the government in church doctrine, the majority astonishingly declares Catholic Charities are not operated primarily for religious purposes because their activities are not religious in nature. She's mad because she says the liberal majority on Wisconsin Supreme Court are entangling church and state, and how dare they do that? And yet here's this Wisconsin judge, and what is she saying at the top of her dissent here? Let me just quote the Bible in my secular court opinion here, my dissent. Like, what the hell are you doing? This is why people don't take their conservatives seriously. I also want to show you what the other side got really mad about here. This is something that the conservative lawyers who represented Catholic Charities, check this one out. The Wisconsin Supreme Court got this case dead wrong, said the vice president and senior counsel at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, the law firm representing Catholic Charities. CCB is religious, whether Wisconsin recognizes that fact or not. And the firm will appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, said a spokesperson for the group. Like, first of all, it is telling that Rosbach's response there doesn't bother mentioning any of the facts I just covered with you because they don't help his case. No one is arguing that Catholic Charities is not Catholic. No one's arguing the Catholic Church is not Catholic. The question is, are the organizations that are underneath at the bottom of the pyramid here, are they Catholic in nature? And when you look at the work they do, there's nothing Catholic-y about it. Like, it's telling he doesn't say that because he wanted that soundbite instead. But honestly, a ruling like this, it's long overdue. It's long past time we stop giving religious organizations everything they want. And you have to think about how many times do religious organizations get everything they want? There was a story on Inside Edition last week by their reporter Lisa Guerrero, who's fantastic, about mega church pastors who don't pay taxes on their mega McMansions. Why not? Because they can claim their homes are owned by their ministries, and so they get a property tax exemption that they really don't deserve and they definitely don't need. You know, should religious ministries be allowed to claim tax exemptions on everything they want just because they have some sort of religious connection? I don't think so. Like, what happens when the Mormon Church starts owning land in various states, which they do? Can they just say, yeah, we're farming on it because we can make money off of it? Should they be able to declare a religious tax exemption on that land? Of course not. And to be fair, they don't. They do pay taxes on that land by and large, as far as I could tell. But serving the poor, serving the needy, that is not inherently religious just because some people want to pretend that's a religious thing. And look, at the end of the day, none of this stops the Catholic Church from doing what it feels it needs to do. If they think that they need to help people, and my God, good for them. If they want to help people, no one's stopping them. They can absolutely help people. No one is trying to shut down their charities. No one's trying to shut down the organizations. If anything, by paying into the unemployment system, what they'll be doing is even more good. Because not only are they helping people who need the charitable help, they're helping people who are unemployed. That sounds like a win-win for everybody. Like, taxes are good if they go to the right things. You know what I mean? So by appealing this to the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, here's what the Catholic Church and the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty is saying. They're saying screwing over the unemployed is a core part of who we are as Catholics. Like, whatever goodwill they might have preserved by saying we're just trying to help the less fortunate, here they are saying, no, we also want to screw over the people who need it the most, the unemployed. By the way, look at this from Becket Religious Fund. This is their website. Look at how they phrased this before the decision came out. Catholic ministry asks court to recognize that serving the poor is religious. Like, that is maybe a heart-gripping headline, but that's not accurate at all. Serving the poor is not religious. It's a nice thing to do, but it's not religious. Plenty of secular people want to help the poor as well. And the whole argument is just because you say something like that is religious doesn't make it religious. And that is why they lost this case, and they deserve to lose this case. So, yay, it's about time. I'm going to pause there for a bit. Den, we can do some questions here if we would like while I close one of the 3 gazillion tabs we have today. Sorry, what was that one? Good job, courts. Yes, agreed. I mean, it is so rare these days to get a court win at a high level that actually has some meaning and impact. So yeah, this is just wonderful to see. And kudos to Wisconsin for electing Janet Protasiewicz last year. I think churches have gotten a free ride for long enough. They seem to think they make a contribution to society, but they only help themselves. Let me push back on this a little bit. I want to give the Catholic Church in this case, but plenty of religious charities do awesome work. I like that they exist. I like that the charities are doing the work they do. And the weird thing is, in this case, the charities are actually amazing. They're not saying, we're going to feed the homeless, but also we're going to make sure they get a Bible when they get their food or something like that. Or saying you have to come to a prayer service before you get whatever it is we're offering. They're not doing that, which is why the courts ruled against them. But again, like, that's kind of what you want to see in a religious charity. If you're inspired by Jesus to do something good, we would be having a very different conversation in this country if more people did that. The problem is, a lot of times charity comes with strings attached. And that's when I think you're right. That's when they're helping themselves and the charity is just a sideshow. The funny thing is, in this case in Wisconsin, the charities were doing everything right. And now they have to pay the taxes because they should, because they're an organization that does any work in the state, you know, like they need to. But the idea that they're all helping themselves, I wish the ones that were in it for themselves, I wish they were punished for that in some way, or at least people would recognize that somehow. But in this case, these charities were actually not helping themselves. They were not advertising the Catholic Church, and that's why they have to pay taxes now. The Catholic hospital I worked for, this is from Den, the Catholic hospital I worked for had 2 sides, the nonprofit side and the for-profit side. There were some strange rules we had to abide by because of the duality too. You know, I don't doubt that for 1 second. And again, we could have a long discussion about Catholic hospitals because sometimes they're the only game in town. So you want the hospital to succeed. because people are going to need their services at some point. But at the same time, because it's a Catholic hospital, they are limited in what services they provide, specifically because their religion teaches them that some things that would actually help people are bad and immoral, like birth control and contraception and, uh, you know, abortion procedures, anything like that. So, yeah, we could have a long discussion about that. Okay, could Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A make a play for tax exemption? That's the extreme of the issue, I feel. So this would have to come down to the US Supreme Court. Again, those are for-profit companies, so they have to pay whatever taxes they have to pay. But then the question is, if Hobby Lobby's owners, if Chick-fil-A's owners are Christian, what are the companies allowed to get away with? I mean, the obvious answer is they shouldn't be allowed to get away with anything. It doesn't matter what religion the owners are. The companies are doing, for-profit work. They're a business. They're a company. Let them abide by whatever rules every company lives by. But again, I don't know if the Supreme Court would even take up this case in Wisconsin. There's nothing controversial for them to weigh in on here. It's not like there are dueling results in different states that they need to step in and mediate here. So I would think the U.S. Supreme Court would not take up this case. But that's a bigger question that is not up for grabs right now. But yeah, they have to play by the rules that, White Castle and Panera have to live up to right now.